Once upon a time, there lived a young woman who avoided her village like a plague. Her name was Dabele, and for 22 years of her life, the village existed only in stories, memories, and whispers from her parents, because the last time she ever stepped her foot in the village, she was only 6 years of age. After that visit, her parents made a silent decision that they would never return. Whenever anyone asked why they never visited the village during Christmas or family meetings, her parents would simply smile and reveal that city life was better. But Dabele grew up sensing that something deeper was hidden behind their simple answer. So, she grew up far away from that place, far away from the people who lived there, and for 22 peaceful years, that village never saw her face again, until the day death forced her to return in the most painful way. Her beloved mother died, and there was only one place that she could be buried, her husband's house in the village. The same village that they had spent decades avoiding. And just like that, the door to an old nightmare reopened. The journey to the village felt longer than it really was. Dabele sat quietly in the car beside her husband Obioma, staring out of the window like someone who was traveling towards an uncertain destiny. Her father sat in the back seat, but he looked like a stranger. The once proud man, who used to command respect wherever he went, now struggled to remember the names of his own children. Alzheimer's had slowly stolen his memory. Some days he remembered everything. Other days he looked at Dabele like she was a visitor. "Where are we going?" he asked for the fourth time. "To bury mommy," Dabele answered softly as her father began to nod slowly. Then, after a few minutes, he asked again, "Where are we going?" Dabele swallowed hard, her chest heavy as memories of her dear mother came rushing back. Her mother was gone, and her father was fading, and now she was returning to a place that had once caused her parents so much pain. She had never planned a burial before. She didn't know the customs. She didn't know the people. She didn't even know where the family house truly stood in the village. All she knew was that her mother deserved a befitting burial. But the moment their car entered the dusty road of the village, Dabele felt a strange chill crawl down her spine, because sometimes peace is the last thing certain villages allow. The compound looked exactly the way she remembered it. The huge duplex that her father built years ago stood there, old and almost forgotten. For a moment, Dabele felt like a little girl again, the same 6-year-old who once ran through the compound chasing chickens. But that memory did not last long, because the moment she stepped out of the car, two sharp voices sliced through the air. "So you finally remember this place still exists?" Dabele slowly turned. Standing in front of the veranda were two women, her father's sisters, who had arrived in the village a few hours earlier. Their faces carried the kind of smile that did not come from happiness. "So this is the daughter your wife raised?" Chika said loudly, as her elder sister Oju folded her arms. After 30 years, she suddenly remembered she has a village. Dabele forced a smile as she greeted her aunties. "Good afternoon, aunties," she said, but neither of them answered. Instead, Chika hissed loudly and said to her, "Your mother did a very bad job raising you." The words landed like stones as Dabele stood quietly and stared at them. Her mother had not even been buried yet, but the insults had already begun. From that moment onward, the atmosphere in the compound became unbearable. Instead of helping her organize the burial, Uju and Chika made it their duty to frustrate her. Every morning, they would sit in the living room like village queens, their legs crossed, their arms folded, as they watched Dabele run around the compound like someone who was drowning in responsibilities. "Where is our food?" Chika would shout. "You think we'll starve in our own brother's house?" Dabele rushed into the kitchen as she prepared food for them, whilst making other plans for the burial. Despite this, her aunties still complained. "This soup is too salty. This rice is too dry. Your mother never trained you properly." Every insult stabbed deeper than the last as Dabele continued to drown in their criticism. Meanwhile, her father wandered around the compound confused. Sometimes he forgot where he was. Other times he forgot his own sisters, but that did not stop them from accusing Dabele of being a terrible child to their brother. "You are starving our brother. Uju shouted one afternoon as she accused Dabele of bringing their brother to the village to kill him. Dabele stared at them in disbelief. They knew about his illness. They knew his memory was failing, but still, they chose to be so unkind to her because hatred does not care about truth. Even when the villagers tried to help Dabele, her aunties found ways to cause more trouble. Neighbors came with firewood. Women offered to cook. Young men volunteered to arrange chairs, but inside the living room, Uju and Chika sat like judges watching a criminal. This girl is useless, so she cannot even organize a simple burial. Chika said loudly, as her sister Uju nodded and began to speak. Her mother spoiled her too much now, so what were you expecting? Their words echoed through the compound like poison as Dabele pretended not to hear them. But every night, she locked herself in her room as she cried quietly. Not just because she missed her mother, but because she now understood the pain that her mother must have endured for decades. The same cruelty, the same insults, the same hatred, and the burial had not even started. However, the worst part came from someone who she never expected, her cousin Hannah, who was Auntie Chika's only son. They had once been inseparable as children, two cousins who played together during family visits, but now Ahana barely looked at her. Whenever she asked him for help arranging things for the burial, he responded with cold indifference. In fact, he ignored her most of the time as he spent his time on his phone chatting, as Dabele sorted things out by herself. This was not the cousin that she remembered, the one who once called her bestie. But then again, bitterness has a way of spreading through families like a contagious disease, and Ahana grew up listening to his mother's hatred for them. His actions began to reflect his state of mind towards her, and Dabele could not believe how far apart they had grown. Even when he tried to pretend, his countenance gave it all away, and this broke Dabele's heart to see hatred emanating from him as well. Finally, the burial day arrived. The compound was filled with so many people. Villagers, friends, relatives. Everyone came to pay their last respect to her mother Soma. For the first time since arriving in the village, Dabele felt a small sense of relief. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The caterers were serving food. The musicians were playing softly. Guests were seated peacefully as Dabele stood beside her husband Obioma, greeting their visitors. For a moment, it looked like her mother would finally get the peaceful burial that she deserved, but peace in that compound was not something that ever lasted long, because suddenly, a loud shouting erupted from the caterer's tent. Dabele turned around quickly as she saw some people gathering around the tent. In the middle of the chaos stood her father's sisters Uju and Chika, their voices louder than the music. Who do you people think you are? Chika shouted. You will serve everyone except our guests? The caterer looked confused. Madam, I'm only serving the list given to me. But Chika refused to listen. This is our brother's compound. Uju yelled. We are the biggest VIPs here. The caterer shook her head nervously. I'm sorry, madams, but my instructions came from Dabele's husband. I was paid to cook and serve his guests only, she said as she explained to them that there was another chef tasked with cooking for the main guest at the burial. Dabele's husband, in a bid not to overwhelm the main chef for the burial, paid another chef to cook for his own guests. Despite this, her aunties decided to still make trouble. The words poured petrol on fire as they began to yell out angrily to the hearing of everyone present. Her husband? Chika screamed. So that man came here to insult us in our own family house? The shouting became louder as guests began to whisper in disbelief. The peaceful burial that Dabele thought would end peacefully slowly began to turn into another battlefield. Dabele and her husband Obioma rushed to the tent immediately. What happened? Dabele asked as the caterer explained what had happened. These women want me to serve guests who are not on the list, she said as she revealed that she was working under strict instructions. Obioma sighed deeply as he saw the trouble that his instructions had caused. He apologized to his wife's aunties as he ordered the chef to serve her guests, but the sisters, instead of calming down, decided to explode again. We don't want your food, Chika shouted angrily as she insisted that Obioma insulted them in their own brother's house. You insulted us already, so don't bother giving us food. We are not beggars. We will go and buy food for our own guests, they said as the crowd murmured in confusion. Dabele felt tears burning behind her eyes. All she wanted was to bury her mother in peace. But even that, her aunties refused to allow it happen. In fact, they demanded that her husband Obioma had to kneel and apologize to them for what he did. Your husband must apologize to us for insulting us in our own brother's compound, they declared as Dabele felt a part of her heart break into a million pieces. Her aunties were looking for a way to humiliate her husband and found the best way to go about it. But Obioma held her hand gently and assured her that he would apologize. I will apologize, my love, he said quietly, as he revealed that he didn't want to create more trouble for his wife. So, he went down on his knees and apologized to them. He humbled himself, despite knowing that he did not do anything wrong. Obioma apologized to his wife's aunties, but despite this, their faces remained cold. That night, Dabele locked herself inside her room and cried like a little child because, as she sat alone in the darkness, memories began to flood her mind. Memories of how those same women had treated her own mother, the hatred, the jealousy, the endless accusations, and for the first time in her life, Dabele truly understood why her parents had stayed away from the village for over 30 years. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemies in life are not strangers, they are part of our own family. Dabele began to remember fragments of things that she had seen as a child but never fully understood. She remembered her mother sitting quietly in the corner of the compound years ago, the last time they visited the village, wiping her tears as Uju and Chika spoke harshly to her. She remembered how her father defended her mother, telling his sisters to leave Summer alone, but they never listened. They always believed that Summer had stolen their brother away from them. Growing up in the city, Dabele had only heard small pieces of the story. Her parents never spoke badly about the villagers or her aunties. They simply chose silence and distance, despite sending money once in a while to the same sisters. However, now, sitting alone in this room, Dabele realized that silence had only hidden a painful truth that no one was ready to confront. Her mother had suffered for years without ever complaining. She had endured insults, accusations, and bitterness simply because she married a man who was from another state. Tears rolled down Dabele's face as she whispered softly, "Mommy, I didn't know it was this bad," she said as she realized that the hatred that she was now facing did not start with her. It started long before she was even born. Years ago, when Ezenwa first told his sisters that he wanted to marry Summer, their reaction had been so explosive. Uju had shouted loudly that their family lineage would be destroyed if their brother married a woman from Imo State. Chika even went further to accuse Summer of using charms to capture their brother's heart. In those days, tribal pride and old village beliefs ruled many people's minds, and marrying outside the state was seen as betrayal. But Ezenwa was deeply in love with Summer. He had met her during her NYC in Port Harcourt, and from the very beginning, he admired her kindness and intelligence. She was gentle, respectful, and hardworking, everything he believed a good wife should be. When his dear mother asked him to bring 4 names of women who he was considering for marriage, he obeyed faithfully. He wrote the names and handed them over to his mother, believing that she would seek God's direction as she promised. Days later, when she pointed to Summer's name, Ezenwa laughed out in disbelief, knowing that Summer was from a state where his mother had warned them never to marry. He asked his mother if this was truly God's will, and his mother, oblivious to the fact that Summer was an Imo woman, nodded her head and assured him that God showed her himself. Ezenwa laughed, knowing that God had a good sense of humor. He revealed to his mother that Summer was an Imo woman, and his mother's face hardened with anger. She told him firmly that he would never marry an Imo woman while she was alive. "Over my dead body," she said repeatedly as Ezenwa laughed, looking at his mother. That moment planted the seed of conflict that would later grow into something far bigger than anyone imagined. Ezenwa stood his ground and refused to abandon the woman that he loved. But from that day forward, his sisters began to see Summer not as a future wife, but as an enemy who had come to steal their brother away from them. True to her word, Ezenwa's mother fought the marriage with everything that she had. She visited elders, consulted spiritualists, and even tried to persuade church leaders to convince her son to change his mind. But Ezenwa was stubborn when it came to matters of the heart. He loved Soma deeply and believed that love should not be controlled by tribal hatred. And as they say, words are powerful. His mother died before they even got married. Months later, Soma became pregnant with their first child. The tension in the family grew even worse. Some people in the village whispered that Soma had bewitched Ezenwa, whilst others believed that she had come with hidden powers from Imo to take control of the family. Yet, through all the accusations and gossip, Soma remained calm and respectful. She never insulted anyone. She never fought back. Instead, she continued to encourage her husband to support his sisters and maintain peace in the family. Ironically, the very woman they accused of separating their brother from them was the one constantly reminding him to care for them. But hatred had a strange way of twisting truth into lies. The more Soma tried to show kindness, the more Uju and Chika interpreted it as manipulation. To them, Soma's quiet nature was proof that she was hiding something. And so, the hostility continued, growing deeper with every passing year. By the time little Dabele was born, the tension between Soma and her husband's sisters had already become a permanent shadow hanging over the family. Chika, the younger sister, was especially bitter. She had always depended heavily on her brother for financial support. Before Soma came into the picture, Ezenwa would often send money to his sisters without question, but after marriage, his responsibilities naturally shifted towards his wife and children. Although he still supported his sisters regularly, Chika felt that Soma had taken her place as the most important woman in his life. This jealousy quietly grew into resentment in a way that when Ezenwa bought something for his wife, Chika would complain that her brother had forgotten his family. Whenever Soma suggested sending money to help the sisters, Chika would accuse her of pretending to be generous. On several occasions, Soma even transferred money directly from her husband's account to his sister Chika, hoping that it would calm the tension. But the bitterness never disappeared. Instead, Chika began spreading rumors that Soma was secretly controlling Ezenwa's decisions. Uju supported these accusations, believing her younger sister completely. Soon, the narrative amongst their relatives became clear that Soma was the outsider who had come to break their family apart. No matter how much kindness she showed, nothing changed their minds, and slowly, the constant hostility pushed Ezenwa farther away from the village as he made up his mind not to put his wife in a situation where she would be maltreated or belittled. So, they remained in the city, hoping that distance would bring the peace that they desired. Soma built a quiet life in the city with her husband and daughter. She focused on raising Dabele, protecting her from the hostility that she had endured in the village. Whenever relatives suggested visiting during holidays, Soma always found excuses to avoid the trip. She did not want her daughter to grow up surrounded by bitterness and accusations, and Ezenwa supported this decision, knowing how much pain his wife had already suffered. So, the years passed peacefully in the city as Dabele grew up happy, unaware of the storms that once surrounded her family. But the village never forgot. Uju and Chika continued to carry their resentment quietly, waiting for opportunity to criticize Soma whenever her name was mentioned. And now, with Soma dead, the old bitterness had finally found a new target. Her daughter Dabele, whose only crime was being the daughter of the woman they so despised. The next morning, Dabele woke up with swollen eyes from crying all night, but something about her demeanor had changed. The sadness was still there, but it was now mixed with quiet strength. As she stepped outside, she saw her aunties already seated in the living room, discussing yesterday's events loudly so that everyone could hear. When they noticed Dabele walking past them, Chika immediately began another round of insults. "Your mother would be ashamed of the way you organized that burial," she said sharply, as her sister Oju nodded in agreement. "A daughter who cannot even feed her elders properly. Is it her husband that should be able to care for?" Dabele did everything possible to ignore them, as she made up her mind never to be like her aunties. Dabele walked up to her father, who was sitting alone on a wooden bench in the compound. He looked up at her confused, as a smile curved on his lips. For a brief moment, he looked like he recognized her. "Soma," he said softly, as Dabele felt her throat tighten. "No, Daddy, it's me, Dabele," she replied gently. But instead of correcting himself, he continued smiling as if he could see his late wife standing before him. In that fragile moment, Dabele realized that even though her father's memory was fading, the love he had for her mother remained deeply rooted in his heart. Days after the burial, the compound slowly returned to its usual vibe. One by one, the visitors left the village, carrying their condolences back to their homes. Dabele packed the few things that she brought and prepared to return to the city with her father. Although they didn't live in the same city, Dabele made sure that she made arrangements for her father. She knew she could not leave him alone, so after much planning, she arranged something she believed would keep him comfortable. Dabele hired a professional carer who would cook for him, give him his medications, and help him with his daily needs. She also asked two relatives to live in the house with him so that her father would never be without company. When everything was set, Dabele hugged her father tightly as she whispered her goodbyes. She lived in a different city with her husband, believing that she had done the responsible thing. However, what she did not know was that this decision would soon become another reason for her aunties to begin a second round of attack on her. They called her a few days later, accusing her of abandoning their brother alone in his house. So after all that your father did for you in his lifetime, you abandoned him alone instead of taking him to your house to care for him? Dabele tried to explain to them that her house was too small to accommodate her father at the time. In fact, she gave them reason why his house was more conducive, seeing that she lived upstairs and her father would find it difficult moving around in such a place. Her aunties were not having it. They accused her of being a terrible daughter who was selfish and wicked. However, Dabele explained to them that she hired a professional carer and arranged for some relatives to live with him in the house, but her aunties refused to listen. Uju even declared loudly that God would judge everyone for their actions. According to them, Dabele was a wicked daughter who had left her sick father to suffer alone. They insisted that she should bring him to live in her house, but they did not care that Dabele's small apartment in the city barely had enough space for her husband and children. They simply criticized everything that she did, not caring about the effort that Dabele was putting in to ensure that her father was well cared for. Every call ended the same way, with insults, accusations, and threats that heaven would punish her. But despite their harsh words, Dabele continued doing everything she could do to ensure that her father was comfortable. She called daily, sent money regularly, and even ensured that her father followed a strict diet that was good for his health. Still, her aunties refused to acknowledge any of her efforts. Months passed slowly. The wounds from her mother's burial were still fresh, but life in the city continued moving forward. Dabele balanced her work, her home, and the constant responsibility of checking on her father. Every few days, she would call the carer to ask how he was doing. Some days, the reports were good. Other days, they were worrying. Alzheimer's had made Ezenwa unpredictable. Sometimes he woke up cheerful and remembered the names of his grandchildren. Other days, he sat quietly, staring at the wall, asking for his late wife. Each time, the carer mentioned those moments, Dabele's chest tightened with sadness. She wished she could be there every day, but reality did not always allow that kind of sacrifice. Still, she tried her best. She paid for his medications, ensured the house always had enough food, even arranged for neighbors to check on him occasionally. But no matter what she did, her aunties never stopped criticizing her. Every time they called, their voices carried the same bitterness. A daughter who truly loves her father would not leave him with strangers, they would say, despite knowing that Dabele loved her father to a fault. Months passed, and Dabele decided to visit her father with her children. She wanted to see how her father was doing, to make sure that he was truly comfortable. When they arrived, Ezenwa's face lit up with unexpected joy. For a brief moment, the fog of his illness seemed to lift as he recognized his daughter and even remembered the names of his grandchildren. The children ran around the compound playing as their laughter filled the quiet house with life again. For 2 weeks, Dabele stayed with her father, making sure that everything was working well. She cooked his favorite meals and sat with him every evening as they watched the children play. Those 2 weeks filled her with so much joy as she wished the visit would never come to an end. However, the 2 weeks went by so fast that Dabele felt so sad leaving her father again. She hugged him tightly as she promised to come visiting during the next holiday. However, what Dabele did not know was that her father did not have much time to live. Tragedy returned to the family at exactly 1 year after her mother died, as her father Ezenwa suddenly collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. The moment she heard those words, her heart began pounding violently in her chest. Without wasting a second, she packed a small bag and traveled to be with him. The journey felt so endless, as every kilometer of road seemed to stretch longer than the last. When she finally arrived at the hospital, she found her father lying quietly on the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped softly in the dim room. His breathing was slow, and his eyes were closed. Dabele sat beside his bed as she held his hand tightly, whispering his name over and over again. That night, she did not sleep. She sat beside him the entire time, watching the monitor that displayed his heartbeat. Every time the numbers changed, her heart skipped with fear. Whenever his breathing sounded different, she quickly called the nurses to check up on him. Dabele wiped his face with a warm cloth as she spoke softly to him, even when he could not respond. For hours, she remained there, hoping that somehow he would open his eyes and tell her that he would be fine. However, this did not happen, as her father passed away peacefully in his sleep the next morning. In that moment, Dabele felt something inside her chest shatter into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to accept her current reality. Her father was gone, the man who had protected her mother from hatred and raised her with so much love. Dabele was broken beyond words. She picked up her phone and called the first person she believed should know, Auntie Chika. The phone rang several times before it was finally answered. "Hello," Chika said impatiently as Dabele's voice trembled as she spoke. "Auntie, Daddy is gone," she said as tears poured down her eyes. For a moment, there was silence. Then the line suddenly disconnected. Chika had hung up without saying a word. Dabele stared at the phone in confusion, thinking that maybe the network had interrupted the call. So she tried again and again, but her auntie did not pick up the call. Still shaking, Dabele decided to call her second auntie Uju. The phone rang again and again, but Uju refused to answer. She tried several times, then decided to send a text explaining that their brother had passed away in the hospital. For hours, there was no response. The silence felt heavy and painful as she wondered if maybe they were grieving privately. But when her phone finally buzzed, she saw a message from her auntie Uju that shocked her to her very bones. "Congratulations, so well done." For a moment, Dabele could not breathe. She read the message again, hoping that she had misunderstood. However, the message was as clear as day, as her auntie Uju was congratulating her for the death of her own father. The phone slowly slipped from her hand as tears poured down her face. In that moment, Dabele realized that the hatred those men carried was far deeper than grief. It had poisoned their hearts so completely that even the death of their only brother could not soften it. And standing alone in the hospital corridor, with the weight of loss pressing down on her chest, Dabele understood that some people are so consumed by bitterness that even tragedy cannot awaken their humanity. But what Dabele did not know was that her father's burial would soon expose a secret that had been hidden for over 30 years.